It was late in the evening when the small house at the edge of the town stood silent, except for the faint sound of coughing from the next room. The air inside smelled faintly of medicine and dust. A young girl sat near the window, holding her school notebook, but not really studying. Her thoughts were far away, heavy with worry. The sound of her mother coughing again made her put down the notebook quickly and rush to her side. Her mother lay weak on the bed, pale but still trying to smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart," she whispered, though both of them knew she wasn't. The girl sat beside her, holding her mother's thin hand and gently rubbing it to keep her warm. "You need your medicine," she said softly. Her mother nodded but said nothing. They both knew the pills were running out, and there was no money to buy more. Life had never been easy for them. Her father had left when she was very small. She didn't remember much about him, only a few blurry pictures in her mind of a tall man holding her as a baby. Since then, her mother had worked endlessly to keep their lives together. Cleaning houses, washing clothes, working extra hours whenever possible. But her health had been getting worse for years, and now even getting out of bed was hard. The girl had started working after school at a small shop, stocking shelves and sweeping floors for a few coins. Every bit she earned went into a small tin box that sat hidden under her bed. It wasn't much, but it was all she had. Some days, when her mother slept, she would take out the tin, open it, and count the money again, not because it had grown, but because it gave her hope. She was 16, though her eyes carried a quiet strength far beyond her age. Life had forced her to grow up quickly. She never complained, never asked, "Why me?" She simply did what needed to be done, and when things became too heavy to bear, she turned to the one thing that always gave her comfort: singing. Her voice was soft and full of emotion. She never had any training, never learned from a teacher. But when she sang, it was as if every word carried her heart with it. Sometimes, when her mother couldn't sleep because of pain, she would ask her daughter to sing a lullaby. And as her voice filled the room, her mother's breathing would slow, and for a moment peace would return. One night, while walking home from the shop, she noticed a large poster on the wall of a cafe. It showed bright lights, smiling faces, and bold letters that said, "National Talent Show, win $50,000. She stopped and stared at it for a long time. People were walking past, but she didn't move. Her heart began to beat faster. That amount of money was more than she had ever seen in her life. It could pay for her mother's surgery, buy medicine, and give them a chance to live without fear. But then a wave of doubt washed over her. She didn't have fancy clothes or makeup or a voice coach like those on TV. She was just a poor girl from a forgotten corner of the city. Could she really stand on a big stage in front of famous judges and a huge crowd? The thought scared her. Yet deep down, something whispered that she had to try. When she got home that night, her mother was sitting up in bed, weaker than usual, but awake. The girl told her about the poster, expecting her to laugh or say it was impossible. Instead, her mother's tired eyes lit up for the first time in weeks. "You should go," she said softly. "You have a gift. Don't hide it. Maybe this is how life will change for us." "But Mama, I don't have anything to wear," the girl said, looking down at her worn dress. "And the city is far. It costs money to get there." Her mother smiled faintly. "We'll find a way. Sometimes miracles happen when we believe in ourselves." The girl didn't sleep that night. She kept thinking about the stage, the lights, the crowd. She imagined herself singing, her mother watching proudly from the audience. That image stayed with her until dawn. The next few days passed quickly. She worked extra hours at the shop, saved every coin, and even skipped lunch to keep a little more money aside. Her boss noticed her tired eyes and asked if she was okay. She just smiled and said she was fine. Nobody knew about her plan except her mother. Finally, she managed to gather enough to cover the bus fare to the city and a small meal for the day. The morning she left, her mother held her tightly. "No matter what happens, I'm already proud of you," she whispered. The girl nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. She didn't want to leave her mother alone, but she knew this was the only chance. The bus ride felt endless. She sat by the window, watching the scenery change from dusty roads to tall buildings and bright billboards. She saw people with headphones, fancy clothes, and shiny shoes, people who looked like they belonged to another world. For a moment, she felt small and invisible. But then she touched the pendant around her neck, a tiny heart her mother had given her years ago, and reminded herself why she was there. When she reached the audition venue, the place was packed with people. Dozens of contestants stood in line, some practicing their songs, others checking their reflections in mirrors. She stood quietly at the end of the line, holding the small paper with her number on it. A few contestants glanced at her, whispering and giggling at her simple clothes. She felt their eyes judging her, but she kept her head down. Inside, the stage looked huge. Bright spotlights glared down, and 3 judges sat behind a long table. One of them, a serious-looking man in an expensive suit, didn't smile at all. He was a well-known music producer, rich and famous, with a reputation for being strict. The girl didn't know it yet, but that man was the one person who would change her life forever. While she waited for her turn, she could hear other contestants perform. Some sang with confidence, others danced or played instruments. The audience clapped and cheered, but she barely heard them. Her hands were trembling. She whispered a quiet prayer and thought about her mother lying in bed, waiting for her. That thought gave her strength. When her number was finally called, she walked onto the stage slowly. The lights were so bright that she could hardly see the judges. Her knees shook, and she almost forgot how to breathe. One of the judges asked for her name and what she was going to perform. Her voice came out shaky at first, but she managed to answer. Then came the silence before the music. The crowd waited. The judges looked bored, and the serious man tapped his pen. The girl closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to sing. The first few notes were soft, uncertain. But as the words flowed, something inside her changed. She wasn't just singing anymore. She was telling her story. Every note carried her love for her mother, her pain, her hope. Her voice filled the hall, rising higher and deeper with every line. Slowly, the whispers stopped. The room became completely silent. Even the serious judge stopped tapping his pen. His eyes lifted, fixed on her. There was something familiar in her tone, a warmth, a pain that reached deep into his chest. He couldn't explain it, but it felt like he was hearing a piece of his own past. By the time she finished, the audience was frozen in awe. Then came a burst of applause so loud it echoed through the hall. The girl stood still, unable to believe what was happening. She had sung from her heart, and they had listened. For the first time in her life, she felt seen. Not as a poor girl, not as someone to be pitied, but as someone who mattered. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. She thought of her mother. She would have smiled so wide if she had seen this moment. As she walked off the stage, she didn't know what the judges were whispering about. She didn't know that one of them couldn't stop staring after her, his mind turning with questions he didn't want to believe. All she knew was that she had done it. She had sung her heart out for her mother, and maybe, just maybe, life was about to change. Outside, the evening sky was fading to orange. She sat alone on the steps, holding her small pendant and smiling softly. She didn't have money, fame, or comfort, but she had hope, and that was enough to keep her going. She whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." And somewhere deep down, she was right. The next morning, the girl woke up in a small room she had rented for one night using the last of her savings. The sound of cars outside reminded her that she was still in the big city. For a few seconds, she lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering if everything that happened the day before had just been a dream. Then she touched the pendant around her neck and smiled. It was real. She had actually sung on that stage. She remembered the crowd clapping, the faces of the judges, and how she had almost cried in front of everyone. Her heart still raced when she thought about it. But now a new worry crept into her mind. Had she done enough to move to the next round? Would they even remember her among so many talented people? She tried not to think about it too much. All she wanted was to call home. She stepped outside to find a phone booth and called the small number her mother used. When she heard her mother's weak voice on the other end, her eyes filled with tears. "Mama, I did it. I sang," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. Her mother laughed softly, the kind of laugh that carried both joy and relief. I knew you would, my love. I knew it. They talked for a while, the girl describing every detail. The big stage, the lights, how scared she had been, and how the crowd clapped when she finished. Her mother listened quietly, smiling through her exhaustion. No matter what happens next, she said, you've already made me proud. After hanging up, the girl went back to the venue. It was the second day of auditions, and the place was even more crowded. Contestants stood in groups, talking excitedly. Some were practicing their songs again, trying to catch the attention of cameras roaming around. She stood alone, clutching her small bag. The same nervous feeling returned, but she reminded herself why she was there. For her mother. Hours passed before the organizers announced the list of names that had made it to the next round. The girl stood among hundreds, her heart pounding. One by one, names were read aloud. Cheers erupted from those who heard theirs, while others quietly walked away. When the announcer finally called her number, she froze for a moment, not sure she had heard right. Then someone beside her said, "That's you." She gasped, covering her mouth as tears filled her eyes. She had made it. Back inside the hall, the judges were seated again, reviewing performances. The serious judge, the rich producer, sat silently, flipping through notes. His assistant noticed how quiet he had been since the previous day. Normally, he would comment sharply on every contestant, pointing out even small mistakes. But now he seemed distant, lost in thought. When he looked at the name list, his eyes paused on one entry. The girl's. Something about her performance had left an impression he couldn't shake off. There was something haunting about her voice, something pure. And her story. She had said she lived with her sick mother and had never known her father. Those words had echoed in his head all night. Years ago, he had been in love with a woman who had disappeared suddenly. He had searched for her for a while but found nothing. Eventually, his career took over and life moved on, or at least that's what he told himself. But sometimes, especially when he saw young singers on stage, he wondered if he had a child somewhere in the world. It was a thought that had always brought a quiet ache to his heart. He tried to brush it off and focus on his work, but when the girl walked back into the room for rehearsal, something inside him shifted again. She was standing on stage waiting for instructions, her hands nervously gripping the microphone. She looked fragile but determined. When she began to sing softly to test the sound system, her voice filled the empty hall once again. Gentle but powerful, like a wave of emotion. The other judges smiled and nodded. But the producer just sat there frozen, staring at her face. The shape of her eyes, the way she tilted her head when she sang. All of it felt painfully familiar. He looked down at her paperwork again. Her mother's name was written there, and in that moment his heart nearly stopped. It was the same name he had tried to find years ago. He excused himself quietly and stepped out of the room. His assistant followed, concerned. "Are you okay, sir?" she asked. He didn't answer. He leaned against the wall, breathing heavily, trying to process what he had just seen. Could it really be? Could this girl be his daughter? Meanwhile, the girl finished her rehearsal and went backstage. She didn't know what was happening beyond those walls. She sat down and began humming softly to herself, thinking of the next song she would perform. The other contestants chatted loudly, but she stayed in her little corner, lost in her thoughts. Later that evening, she was given her song schedule for the next day. The final auditions would take place on a bigger stage, with cameras recording everything for television. It was her biggest chance yet, and she didn't want to fail. She went back to her room, tired but filled with hope. Before sleeping, she opened the tin box she had brought with her, where she kept her small savings and a folded picture of her mother. She kissed the picture and whispered, "I'll make it for you, Mama." Across the city, the producer sat in his office, staring at the same name written on the contestant sheet. He took out an old photograph from his drawer, a picture of himself and a young woman standing by the sea. He compared the woman's eyes to the girl's in his memory, and his heart told him the truth even before his mind could accept it. It can't be a coincidence, he muttered to himself. He didn't know what to do. Should he talk to her? Should he tell her? What if he was wrong? He hadn't seen that woman in over 15 years. Maybe this was all a mistake. But what if it wasn't? The thought kept him awake all night. The next morning, the final round began. The girl stood backstage, her hands trembling again. The crowd outside was huge this time, lights brighter, cameras flashing. She took deep breaths, trying to calm herself. "You can do this," she whispered under her breath. "You're doing it for her." When she walked out, the hall filled with quiet. Her name was announced, and she took her place on the stage. The producer watched her closely. He wanted to say something to stop the show, but he couldn't. He had to be sure. The music began, and once again her voice filled the room. This time, she sang a song she had written herself, about love, loss, and never giving up. It was raw and emotional, every word carrying a piece of her heart. Halfway through, her voice broke slightly, and she took a shaky breath. The audience leaned in, feeling every emotion with her. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The crowd stood to their feet, clapping and cheering. Even the other judges couldn't hide their admiration. The producer, however, sat still, tears slowly welling in his eyes. He didn't clap immediately. He just looked at her, realizing the truth his heart had already accepted. She bowed shyly and walked off the stage, unaware of what was going through his mind. As she passed him, he whispered something so quietly that only he could hear. "I'm sorry." Backstage, the girl waited anxiously for the results. Her heart pounded as she thought about her mother and the promise she had made to her. She didn't care about fame or cameras. All she wanted was enough money to make her mother healthy again. That was all that mattered. When the results were announced later that evening, her name was among the top finalists. She couldn't believe it. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she covered her face. The audience clapped louder, cheering for the girl who had come from nothing but had managed to touch their hearts. The producer wiped his eyes discreetly. He couldn't approach her yet, not like this, not in front of everyone. But he knew what he had to do next. He needed to find the truth. And deep down, he already knew that after this show ended, nothing in his life would ever be the same again. That night, the girl called her mother again. When she heard the weak voice answer, she couldn't stop crying. "Mama, I made it to the finals," she said breathlessly. Her mother's soft laughter came through the line, mixed with tears of joy. "I told you, my love. You were born to shine." They didn't talk for long, but that call gave her strength like never before. As she lay down to rest, she didn't know that the man who would change her life was only a few steps away, and that the truth about who she really was about to come out in ways she could never have imagined. The day of the final performance arrived faster than the girl had imagined. The city was buzzing with excitement. Posters were everywhere, showing smiling contestants who had made it to the last round. She had never been on a stage that big before. It was the kind of place she had only seen on TV. Shiny floors, bright lights, cameras, and rows of seats filled with people she didn't know. Backstage, everything was moving fast. Staff members ran around, adjusting lights and cables. Contestants stood in front of mirrors, practicing their songs one last time, their voices echoing through the hall. Some looked confident, others scared. The girl stood quietly in a corner, holding her pendant and taking deep breaths. She had chosen to sing a song she wrote for her mother, the one person she wanted to make proud more than anyone in the world. She hadn't slept much the night before. She kept thinking about her mother back home, lying in bed waiting for her call. Every note of her song felt like a message to her mother, a promise that things would soon get better. She didn't care about the cameras, the fame, or even the prize money anymore. She just wanted to sing from her heart and make her mother smile again. When her turn finally came, she could hear the crowd cheering from behind the curtain. Her hands were shaking, her heart pounding so loudly she thought the audience could hear it. A stagehand gave her a small nod, signaling it was time. She took one deep breath and walked out into the light. The lights were blinding, but she could feel the warmth of the crowd. The judges sat in their seats, their faces calm but serious. Among them was the producer, the man she didn't know was her father. His heart was racing even faster than hers. He had spent the past few days trying to confirm what he feared, and hoped, was true. Every word she spoke, every smile she gave, every small gesture reminded him more and more of the woman he once loved and the daughter he never got to hold. He had found someone from his past to verify the truth. A call, a few questions, a photograph, and suddenly his world had changed. The girl standing on that stage was indeed his child, his lost daughter. Now as she stood in front of him, holding the microphone with both hands, he couldn't speak. His throat tightened. He wanted to stand up and tell her everything, but he couldn't ruin her moment. Not now. She deserved to shine first. The music began. Soft piano notes filled the hall, and the girl closed her eyes. The first line came out quiet and shaky, but then her voice grew stronger. It carried emotion that no training could teach. Each word painted a story, her mother's struggles, her own fears, her hopes for a better life. The audience grew silent. Even those in the back stopped whispering. Her song wasn't just about music. It was about life, love, and pain. People could feel it. Some wiped their eyes without realizing it. The producer leaned forward, his hands clasped tightly. He could hear echoes of her mother's voice in the way she sang. The way her lips formed each word, the tremble in her tone. It was like hearing the past come back to life. His eyes filled with tears he tried to hide. When the final note came, it lingered in the air for a long time. The hall stayed quiet for a few seconds, and then applause erupted like thunder. People stood to their feet, cheering and shouting her number. She stood frozen in place, her eyes wide with disbelief. She had done it again. She had made them feel something real. The host came on stage smiling. "What a performance," he said as the crowd continued to clap. The girl bowed shyly, holding her pendant again. For a moment, all the noise faded in her head. She thought only of her mother and how proud she would be. The judges began to speak one by one. They praised her voice, her song, her courage. Then it was the producer's turn. He sat quietly for a moment before speaking. His voice was lower than usual, a little shaky. "You have something rare," he said softly. "Something you can't learn from anyone. You sing with truth, and that's what makes people listen." The girl smiled nervously and whispered a thank you. She didn't notice the strange way he looked at her, not just as a contestant, but as someone he had missed his whole life. After her performance, she went backstage. Other contestants congratulated her politely, but she could see the worry in their faces. They knew she had touched the audience deeply. She sat in a corner again, breathing heavily, her heart still racing. She didn't care about winning anymore. Just being there singing for her mother had been enough. But what she didn't know was that her song had done more than move the crowd. It had changed the life of the man sitting behind that judge's table. Later that evening, after all contestants had performed, the judges met privately to discuss the results. The producer couldn't focus. The other judges argued about scores and audience votes, but he barely heard them. He kept looking at her name on the sheet. He knew that even if she didn't win, he had already found something far more important than any prize. When the meeting ended, he stayed behind, lost in thought. He finally made up his mind. He asked one of the organizers for her contact details, pretending it was for professional reasons. He didn't want to scare her or cause trouble during the show. He just needed to know more about her life. Meanwhile, the girl had returned to her small rented room. She called her mother again, her voice full of joy. "Mama, I sang for you today," she said softly. The crowd stood up. They clapped for so long. Her mother's weak laughter came through the receiver. "I told you, my love. When you sing, hearts listen." The girl smiled through tears. "I wish you were here," she whispered. "I am," her mother said. "Every note you sing carries me with you." After hanging up, the girl sat by the window looking out at the city lights. She had never felt this mixture of happiness and fear before. What if she didn't win? What if this was her last chance? But then she reminded herself, she hadn't come here for fame. She had come for love, for family, for hope, and that made her already a winner in her own heart. The next day, the producer visited the hospital where he believed her mother was staying. He didn't go inside right away. He stood outside the gate watching people walk in and out. His heart was beating so fast it hurt. He hadn't seen the woman in years. He didn't know what he would say if she recognized him. After a long moment, he turned away. He wasn't ready yet. He needed time to think, to gather the right words. So he left quietly, promising himself that after the show he would face the truth. Back at the talent show, preparations for the finale were in full swing. Reporters, camera crews, and guests filled the building. The atmosphere was electric. The girl arrived early, her simple dress neatly ironed, her hair tied back the way her mother liked it. She didn't have a stylist or a team, just her voice and her heart. When she stepped onto the stage for the last rehearsal, the sound technicians were still adjusting the lights. She began to sing softly, unaware that the producer had entered the hall. He stood at the back listening. Each note pierced deeper into his heart. He closed his eyes and saw flashes of the past. The day he held her mother's hand. The day she left, the years he spent wondering why. When the music stopped, the girl looked up and noticed him standing there. She didn't know who he really was, but something in his eyes made her pause. He walked closer and smiled gently. "You sing beautifully," he said quietly. "Thank you," she replied shyly. He hesitated for a moment, as if wanting to say something more, but then he simply nodded and walked away. That night she couldn't sleep again. She kept thinking about the show, about her mother, and about that kind judge whose words had felt strangely warm. She didn't know why, but when he spoke, it had felt almost like hearing a voice from somewhere deep in her heart. Outside, the city lights flickered in the distance. Tomorrow would decide everything, her future, her mother's chance at recovery, and a truth she was not yet ready to face. The morning of the final show came with the sound of laughter, music, and nerves filling the air. Everywhere she looked, there were people rushing. Camera crews setting up, assistants fixing microphones, makeup artists brushing powder on contestants' faces. The building was alive with energy, but inside the girl's heart was calm in a strange way. Maybe it was because she had already decided that whatever happened today, she had done her best. She sat alone backstage, quietly holding her pendant and whispering to herself, "This is for you, Mama." Her mother's face flashed in her mind, pale but smiling. She wished she could be in the audience today, sitting in one of the front seats cheering for her. But she knew her mother was far away, still fighting to stay strong, waiting for her call after the show. That thought gave her strength. The host's voice echoed from the stage as the show began. The crowd roared with excitement. The lights flashed and the cameras rolled. The judges took their seats, each with a small smile as they greeted the audience. The serious producer sat quietly, his hands folded together. His mind was not only on the show, but on the truth he had discovered about the girl. He hadn't slept much. All night he had been thinking about what to do. He had confirmed that she was indeed his daughter, the daughter he had searched for years ago. The woman he loved had disappeared from his life, leaving behind only silence and unanswered letters. He had thought she didn't want him anymore, that she had moved on. But now he knew she had simply wanted a quiet life, away from the noise of fame and the city. And in that quiet life she had raised their child. He looked at the stage, his chest tight. She was about to perform and the whole country would be watching. He knew he couldn't say anything now. Not here, not in front of cameras. But after tonight he would tell her everything. He had missed too many years already. When her name was called, the girl took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The crowd clapped warmly as she stood under the bright lights. She looked out at the sea of faces, but all she could think of was her mother. The stage lights made her eyes glisten as she held the microphone close. The music began softly, a melody she had written herself. Her voice trembled at first, but soon it grew steady, gentle, full of feeling. She sang about hope and love, about believing even when the world feels dark. Each word was like a message to her mother, a promise that they would make it through. The crowd listened in silence. Even the judges forgot to take notes. The producer leaned forward, tears forming in his eyes as he watched her. Every note reminded him of the woman he once loved, the same gentle way she used to sing, the same emotion. He felt as if time had turned backward, taking him to the days when love had been simple and pure. As the song ended, the entire hall stood up. The applause was loud and long. Some people were crying. The girl bowed, smiling through tears, overwhelmed by the response. She had never felt love like this before. Love from strangers who saw her heart. When she walked off stage, the producer couldn't hold back anymore. He stood up and quietly followed her backstage. She was sitting on a chair, breathing hard, her hands still shaking. When she saw him, she quickly stood up, surprised. "That was beautiful," he said softly. "Thank you," she replied shyly, not knowing what else to say. He hesitated, his eyes full of emotion. For a moment he wanted to tell her everything, that he was her father, that he had been searching for her, that her mother had once been the love of his life. But then he looked around and saw the cameras nearby, staff members rushing in and out, and he stopped himself. "It wasn't the right time. Have you spoken to your mother lately?" he asked suddenly. The girl nodded. "Yes, last night. She's still sick, but she said she's proud of me." He swallowed hard. She must be, he said quietly. You've done something special here. There was something in his voice and something that made her look at him differently for a moment. She didn't know why, but she felt a strange connection to him, like she had known him before. His eyes seemed familiar, gentle and sad all at once. Before she could ask anything, one of the crew members called her name to prepare for the closing ceremony. The producer gave her a small nod and said, "Go ahead. You deserve this moment." She smiled, clutching her pendant, and walked away. He stood there for a while, watching her disappear behind the curtains, his heart aching with both pride and regret. The final results were about to be announced. All the contestants gathered on stage, holding hands nervously. The lights dimmed and the host's voice echoed across the hall. And the winner of this year's national talent show is... The crowd fell silent. The pause felt like forever. Then the host smiled and shouted her name. The crowd erupted into cheers. Confetti filled the air. The girl froze for a second, unable to believe it. Her knees weakened and she covered her face, tears streaming down. She had won. The producer stood and clapped slowly, his eyes shining with emotion. It wasn't just pride, it was something deeper. He was looking at his daughter, the little girl he never knew, standing under the lights as the world cheered for her. When she received the trophy, she held it tightly and looked up toward the ceiling, whispering, "This is for you, Mama." The cameras captured her tears, her trembling smile, her pure joy. It was a moment that touched everyone watching, both in the hall and on TV. After the show, she went backstage again, still in disbelief. The trophy glittered in her hands, but all she wanted was to call her mother and share the news. She borrowed a phone and dialed quickly. Her mother's voice was weak but full of happiness. "You did it, didn't you?" The girl laughed through tears. "Yes, Mama. I won. We did it." For a moment, there was silence on the line. Then her mother said softly, "I knew you would. You've always had a light inside you. I'm so proud." The girl wiped her tears and whispered, "Hold on a little longer, Mama. I'm coming home soon. We can get you the treatment now." The call ended and she sat quietly for a while, holding the phone to her chest. Her dream had come true, not just winning, but being able to save her mother. Across the room, the producer watched her from a distance. He didn't want to interrupt her happiness, but his heart was restless. He knew that this secret couldn't stay hidden any longer. She deserved to know the truth. He couldn't let another day pass pretending to be just a judge. He took a deep breath and walked toward her. The noise around them faded as he approached. When she looked up and saw him, she smiled, still wiping her eyes. "Congratulations," he said gently. "Thank you, sir," she replied. "I can't believe it's real." He nodded, his eyes soft. "You've earned it. You've given people something they'll never forget." There was a pause. He wanted to speak, to tell her everything, but his voice caught in his throat. "There's something I need to tell you," he began quietly. "It's about your family." Before he could continue, a reporter rushed over to take her picture. The moment was lost. She was pulled away by staff members, smiling and waving as cameras flashed. The producer stepped back, his hands trembling slightly. It wasn't the right time. Not yet. He turned and walked toward the empty hallway, away from the noise. As he reached the door, he whispered to himself, "Tomorrow. I'll tell her tomorrow." The girl, still surrounded by cameras, held her trophy close. She had no idea that her life was about to change again, not because of fame or money, but because the truth she had never known was waiting just around the corner. That night, as she packed her things, she thought about the kind judge again. Something about his words, the way he had looked at her, stayed in her mind. She didn't know why, but she felt that he understood her more than anyone else. She hoped she could thank him properly one day. Outside the studio, the city lights shimmered. The night felt peaceful, full of promise. She didn't know that somewhere, just a few miles away, the man who had been watching over her from the shadows was sitting in his car, staring at an old photograph, a picture of her mother holding a baby. He smiled sadly, whispering, "I found you. Tomorrow would bring truth, tears, and healing." But for now, the world was quiet, and the girl who had once sung to save her mother finally slept with hope in her heart. The morning after the show was quiet and beautiful. The sun slipped through the thin curtains of the small hotel room where the girl had stayed for the night. Her trophy stood on the table near the window, shining in the golden light. She woke up slowly, still unsure if everything that had happened was real. For a long moment, she just sat there staring at it, remembering the cheers, the lights, And the moment her name was called, her heart swelled with pride, but the thought of her mother returned almost instantly. She reached for her phone and checked for messages, but there was none. Her mother must still be resting. The girl smiled faintly and whispered, "Hold on, Mama, I'll be home soon." Downstairs, reporters were already waiting. The lobby buzzed with noise, flashing cameras, microphones, and excited voices. Everyone wanted a word with the winner. She felt shy but polite, answering their questions with a soft voice. "I just wanted to sing from my heart," she told them. "My mom inspired me." The producer watched from a distance, leaning against the wall, his arms folded. He didn't approach her yet. He wanted to wait for the right moment, a private one, away from the crowd and cameras. He had spent the entire night thinking of what to say, how to tell her the truth without frightening or confusing her. After the short interview, she finally managed to escape the reporters and slipped outside into the cool air. The morning breeze felt fresh, and for the first time in months she could breathe easily. She walked to a nearby park holding a cup of tea she had picked up from a stall. The city looked so alive, cars rushing, birds flying, children laughing. But inside she still felt the same quiet longing. She wanted her mother to be here with her, to share this happiness. She sat on a bench, sipping slowly, when a car stopped quietly nearby. The producer stepped out wearing a simple coat. He spotted her immediately and walked toward her, his heart beating faster with each step. When she looked up and saw him, she smiled politely. "Good morning, sir," he smiled back. "Good morning. I hope you don't mind me joining you." "Not at all," she said softly. They sat in silence for a while, watching the leaves move in the gentle wind. Then he spoke, his tone calm but serious. "You did something very special yesterday. Not just winning them, but the way you sang. It touched everyone, including me." "Thank you," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure if I was good enough." "You are more than good enough," he said firmly. "You have a gift, and your mother must be proud." At the mention of her mother, her eyes softened. "She's the reason I did all this," she said. "She's been sick for a long time and I wanted to help her. She always believed in me even when no one else did." The man looked down, trying to hide the emotion rising in his eyes. "I know what it's like," he whispered. She tilted her head. "You do?" He nodded slowly. "Years ago I loved someone very deeply, but life pulled us apart. I thought I'd never see her again. I didn't know she had a child." His voice cracked slightly at the end and she looked at him curiously. "She must have been special," she said gently. He smiled faintly, eyes distant. "She was. She had your kindness, your courage." He took a deep breath, then turned to face her fully. "That's why I came today. There's something I need to tell you. Something important." The girl frowned slightly, not sure what he meant. The breeze grew still and the world around them seemed to quiet down. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an old photograph. His hands trembled slightly as he held it out to her. She took it carefully and looked down. It was a picture of a young woman holding a baby, both smiling softly. The woman's eyes looked exactly like hers. Her breath caught in her throat. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. He swallowed hard. "That woman is your mother." Her eyes widened. "My mother?" He nodded slowly, his voice low and full of emotion. "And that baby in her arms is you." For a long moment she just stared at the photograph, unable to speak. Her heart pounded in her chest as confusion and disbelief flooded her. "How do you have this?" she asked, her voice shaking. He looked down, his eyes glistening. "Because I took it. I took it the day you were born." She froze, the words echoing in her ears. She felt like the ground beneath her had disappeared. "What are you saying?" she whispered. He looked at her, his face full of pain and love. "I'm saying, I'm your father." The world seemed to stop for a moment. The girl stared at him, her mouth slightly open, unable to form words. The man she had seen as just a judge, someone powerful, distant, unreachable, was now saying he was her father. Tears welled in her eyes. She shook her head slightly as if trying to make sense of it all. No, that can't be true. My mother never told me." "She didn't," he said softly. "And I don't blame her. She wanted to protect you. We had a misunderstanding years ago and I lost touch with her. I searched for both of you for years, but she never contacted me again. I thought she had moved on." Her chest tightened. "All this time," he nodded. When I saw you on that stage, I felt something I couldn't explain. You reminded me so much of her. The way you sang, the look in your eyes. So I checked quietly, and then I found out the truth. She sat in silence, clutching the photo to her chest, her eyes filled with tears again. But this time they weren't just from shock. They were from years of not knowing, from missing a piece of herself she hadn't realized was gone. He continued softly, I didn't want to tell you before the show. I didn't want to confuse you or distract you. But you deserve to know who you are. You're my daughter, and I'm so proud of you. The words broke something open inside her. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, all these years I thought I didn't have a father. I thought he didn't want me. He shook his head quickly, his own tears falling. No, never. I wanted you more than anything. I just didn't know where you were. She covered her mouth, trying to hold back her sobs. He reached out but stopped himself for a moment, unsure if she was ready. She looked at him, her lips trembling, and whispered, Is it really you? He nodded and finally placed his hand gently over hers. It's me. I'm here now. For a long time they just sat there, both crying quietly, holding on to each other. The park around them faded into silence. It was as if the world had paused to give them this moment. A moment of truth, love, and healing. After a while, she spoke softly, still looking at the photo. Mama, she never told me about you. But I always felt like something was missing. I used to ask her sometimes, but she'd just smile and say, You have all the love you need. He smiled sadly. That sounds like her. She was always so strong, even when she was hurting. The girl looked up, wiping her tears. She's sick now. That's why I entered the show, to help her get treatment. He nodded slowly. I know. I've already spoken to the hospital. I want to help, she blinked in surprise. You did? Yes, he said. It's the least I can do. She gave you a beautiful life, even when it wasn't easy. Now it's my turn to be there for both of you. The girl didn't know what to say. Gratitude, confusion, love, on everything mixed together inside her. She smiled weakly, still trembling. Thank you, she whispered. He squeezed her hand gently. No, thank you for finding me again. They sat together for a long while after that, talking softly. He told her about the years he had spent building his life, the mistakes he had made, and the emptiness he had felt not knowing what had happened to them. She told him about her mother's laughter, the small apartment where they lived, and how music had kept them both alive through hard times. When the sun began to set, they stood together, looking out over the city. The girl turned to him and said softly, Can you come with me tomorrow? To see Mama? He smiled through tears. I wouldn't miss it for the world. They walked back slowly, side by side, no longer strangers, but father and daughter finally brought together by truth and love. That night, as she lay in bed, the photo resting on the pillow beside her, she felt a peace she hadn't known before. For the first time in her life, the missing pieces were coming together. Tomorrow she would go home, not alone, but with the man she had unknowingly sung in front of, unknowingly reached and unknowingly found again. The morning was quiet and full of soft sunlight when the girl packed her small bag. Her trophy rested safely inside, wrapped in her scarf. She couldn't stop smiling, but deep down her heart raced. Today she would go home. Today her mother would finally hear the news and meet the man who had just told her the truth she never expected. When she stepped outside, the producer was already waiting near his car. He looked calm, but there was something tender in his eyes, something protective. He opened the door for her, and she climbed in silently. The ride began with little words, just the hum of the road and the sound of the wind brushing past. Every few minutes, she would glance at him and wonder if all of it was still real. The confession, the photograph, everything. She had cried so much the night before that her eyes were sore, but her heart felt light. It was strange how quickly life could change, how one song, one moment could turn sadness into hope. After a long drive, they reached the small town where she lived. The streets were quiet, with children playing by the roadside and shopkeepers sweeping the dust in front of their stores. The producer looked out the window, taking it all in. His eyes softened as he realized this was where his daughter had grown up. Not in luxury or comfort, but in love and simplicity. When they reached the narrow lane near her home, she turned to him and whispered, She doesn't know you're coming. I didn't tell her yet. I thought, it would be better if you were there when I tell her. He nodded gently. Whatever you think is best. She led him through the narrow path that opened into a small yard. The house stood quietly under a tree. its walls faded but clean. The air smelled faintly of flowers and soap. She stopped for a moment at the door, her hand trembling slightly. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Yes. I just hope she's strong enough for surprises." When they stepped inside, the woman on the bed turned her head slowly. Her face lit up when she saw her daughter, her eyes bright despite her weakness. "You're home," she whispered, smiling. The girl rushed forward and hugged her tightly, tears already in her eyes. "Mama, I did it. I won." Her mother's eyes widened with joy. "You won? Oh, my darling, I knew you would." She reached out and touched her daughter's face gently. "I'm so proud of you." The girl smiled, trying to hold back her tears. "We can get your treatment now. You'll be fine soon." The woman smiled softly but said nothing. Her hand trembled as she brushed her daughter's hair. "You've always been my greatest blessing." At that moment, the producer stepped quietly inside. The mother's smile faded a little as she looked up at him. For a moment, confusion filled her face. Then recognition flickered in her eyes. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. He stood there, frozen, unsure whether to speak. But then he said softly, "Hello." The woman's eyes glistened. "It's you." The girl looked between them, confused. "You know him?" she asked, her voice trembling. Her mother nodded slowly, tears forming. "Yes, and I do." The girl looked at both of them, realization dawning slowly. "Mama," she whispered, "he told me yesterday. He's my father." The woman closed her eyes, a tear rolling down her cheek. She turned her face away for a moment, breathing shakily. The air in the small room felt heavy, full of unspoken memories. He took a step closer. "I didn't come to hurt you," he said softly. "I only found out recently. I didn't know. I never knew where you were." The woman's voice broke as she spoke. "I thought you'd forgotten us." He shook his head quickly. "Never. I searched for years. I thought you didn't want me anymore." Then everything went silent. "I thought you'd moved on." She opened her eyes again, staring at him through tears. "I was scared. You were already becoming successful, surrounded by people who wouldn't understand me or the baby. I didn't want to be a burden." "You were never a burden," he said, his voice trembling. "You were my world." The girl stood there silently, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. She had dreamed of moments like this, but she never imagined it would be so full of pain and love mixed together. Her mother looked up at her, trying to smile through her tears. "I wanted you to have peace, my dear. That's why I never told you. But I never stopped loving him." The girl knelt beside her and took her hand. "Mama, you don't have to carry it alone anymore. He's here now. We're together again." The room went quiet. The only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Then the woman reached out her other hand toward the man. "I never thought I'd see you again." He took her hand gently and held it between both of his. "You'll never have to wonder again. I'm here. I'll take care of both of you." Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "It's been such a long time." The girl rested her head on her mother's lap, crying softly. Her mother stroked her hair and whispered, "You see, my love always finds its way home." Hours passed in quiet conversation. They spoke of the years they had lost, the things they had wished to say, and the dreams that never faded. The producer promised to arrange the best medical care for her mother, and though the woman protested at first, he gently insisted. "You took care of our daughter," he said. "Now it's my turn to take care of you." The woman smiled weakly. "You've both already given me everything I ever wanted." That night, as the stars appeared outside, the three of them sat together. The girl played a soft tune on her small keyboard, one she used for practice when she was younger. The melody filled the little room, gentle and full of emotion. Her father and mother sat quietly, listening, holding hands. At one point, the mother whispered, "You sing like hope itself." The girl smiled through her tears. "It's your song, Mama." Her father looked at both of them, his heart full. He had missed so much. Her first words, her first steps, her first song. But now, sitting here, he felt whole for the first time in years. Days passed. The mother's condition began to improve with treatment. The medicine and care that had once been out of reach were now possible. The girl spent her days by her mother's side, singing to her softly, while her father worked quietly to make sure everything was handled. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, they sat outside together. The girl rested her head on her mother's shoulder. Her father stood nearby, watching them with a gentle smile. "Life is strange," the mother said softly. It takes us far apart, but somehow it brings us back where we belong. The girl nodded, her eyes warm. Maybe music brought us together. Her father chuckled softly. Maybe it did. There was a peaceful silence after that, the kind that doesn't need words. When night came, they went inside. The mother looked tired but happy. Before going to sleep, she took her daughter's hand and said, "Promise me you'll keep singing no matter what happens. Your voice has a purpose. It heals hearts and even mine." The girl nodded, tears in her eyes. "I promise." Her mother smiled, squeezed her hand gently and whispered, "And always remember, love finds its way back." The next morning came quietly. Sunlight filled the room and a soft breeze moved the curtains. The girl woke up and found her mother resting peacefully, a calm smile on her face. She touched her hand gently and whispered, "Good morning, Mama." There was no answer. Her father stepped forward, his face full of sorrow but peace. He held her shoulder and whispered, "She's gone, my dear. She's free now." Tears fell silently down her face, but somehow she wasn't angry. Her mother had seen her dream come true. She had reunited with the man she loved. She had left the world surrounded by peace and love. Days later, during a small ceremony, the girl sang one last song, the same one she had sung at the talent show. The crowd that had gathered in the yard listened in silence as her voice rose into the evening air. Each word carried her love, her pain, and her mother's memory. When the song ended, her father walked up beside her and took her hand. They looked at each other and then at the sky. There were no words left to say, just a quiet understanding that life had taken them through storms but finally led them home. Months passed, and together, they built a new life. The girl continued singing, this time with her father's support. He became her guide, not as a producer, but as a father. Her songs began to reach people everywhere, songs about love, faith, and the power of never giving up. And every time she stepped onto a stage, she looked up for a moment and whispered, "This one's for you, Mama," because in her heart, she knew, it wasn't just a song that had changed her life. It was love, the kind that never fades, never gives up, and always finds its way home.